أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي لا يبلغ مدحته القائلون ولا يحصي نعماءه العادون ولا يؤدي حقه المجتحدون الذي لا يدركه بعد الحمم ولا يناله غوص الفطن ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وشفيع ذنوبنا سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد وآل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين صاحب العصر والزمان خليفة الرحمن إمام الإنس والجان ولعن الله أعداهم أجمعين إلى يوم الدين أما بعد فقد قال الله وقوله الحق بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم هو الذي أرسل رسوله بالهدى والدين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله وكفى بالله شهيدا صدق الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل على محمد. The privilege of faith has been our ongoing topic. Tonight is lecture number 5. Our discussion and the base of our discussion has been revolving around the premise that there are a lot of questions about our Shia ideology from now within the circles of Shiism, and specifically those of my youth, where they ask us some fundamental questions about some of the basic tenets of the madhab of Shiism. And while there are some youth that ask with the purest of intentions, that they really want to know why we do this and why we do that, there are others that have a different tone to their questions. And the tone to their question is that why don't we compromise our ideology a little bit, since we are in the minority, to fit and to kind of mold into mainstream Islam. And the nature by which they're asking the question is for them now almost as if they have expected this idea. The Shia ideology is a branch off of Islam. And the Shia madhab is a rebel group that broke off from Saqifa, let's say, for example, and kind of made up their own deen and their own ideology and their own fiqhi rulings. And so in order for us to kind of, unite with the rest of Islam, let's try to tweak our rulings. So examples I gave you were very simple ones. For example, doing sujood on carpet, or praying with our arms folded, or removing Aliyun Waliullah from the adhan. All this to compromise and to bend and to break our ideology to fit with mainstream, meaning that the majority is right and we, the minority, must have been wrong. So let's make sure we put forth the effort to present one unified deen. And that's a problem for me. That is a deen that we don't quite understand. And so I have been trying to establish now for 4 nights that the deen that we belong to, and I'll say specifically the maktab of the Ahlul Bayt, is the deen-e-haq that the Quran refers to time and time again. There's always been one Islam, there's one Islam today, there always will be one Islam. There's not 1,000 Islams out there. And that Islam that we believe in, that the Quran refers to in the verse I read for you every night in the khutbah as deen-e-haq, is that deen that goes through Ghadir and through Karbala. There's no other deen out there. Everything else that goes off this path is a distortion or a deviation from that deen-e-haq. Now, we have to accept that to be a privilege of ours. If you were raised by your mothers to grow up to love Imam Ali and cry for Imam Hussein and wait for Imam Zamana, this is a privilege given to you by your mother. And that privilege has to be accepted and acted upon. Once we don't accept this to be a privilege, it's easily now swayed and moved by those around us. So last night I talked about the idea where I mentioned that sometimes what removes us from this privilege are the trials of this dunya. We talked about khawf and huzn last night as two emotions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala seems as if addresses up and down the Quran. And maybe it's His way of saying it's these two emotions that could remove us from that privileged path of Deen Haq. Now tonight what I want to establish, and this will carry forward in the next 3 or 4 nights, is one of the reasons why we don't feel that privilege is because we don't have yaqeen in the faith that we believe in. And that yaqeen and that certainty in the faith that we believe in, if it's strong enough, it should relate into us feeling like we are privileged. Now, somebody had asked me a few nights ago, and it's a beautiful question, and I welcome this kind of feedback, is that you keep saying privilege, privilege, privilege. Are there some Arabic words out there for this? Are some Urdu words that we can relate to? And there are. One is that is used across Arabic and Urdu. In fact, 2 words. One is imtiyaz, one is sharaf. Both words are used inside the Arabic Quranic terminology and also in Urdu as well. An honor, a privilege given to you. But remember, I'll repeat myself time and time again on 2 points. Number 1, I'm not suggesting that this privilege is undue advantage or undeserving advantage. No, this privilege is given to us by Allah on a potential basis. He's placed everything in our path for us to be guided by. Number 2, it's not that now all of a sudden I'm against unity or against interfaith or intra-faith. No, of course not. I think we should have absolutely programs with our Christian brothers and our Sunni brothers and our Jewish brothers. I'm simply trying to fortify the backyard inside of our own home and not worry about other homes just yet. Sometimes in order for us to affect homes outside of us, our home has to be intact as well. We have to remind ourselves that the path that we belong to is a beautiful path of Deen and Haqq. And it is a path that we'll be asked about on the Day of Judgment. Now, in this discussion on yaqeen, all of you know that certainty in the Deen is a very important component. And the Quran reminds us in Surah Al Imran, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, رَبَّنَا لَا تُزِغْ قُلُوبَنَا بَعْدَ إِذْ هَدَيْتَنَا. That, oh Allah, protect me or don't allow zayg to enter my heart after you've already guided us. Meaning what? It's possible for us to steer off the path, and that's what zayg is. Zayg is thinking we're going straight when we're actually bending off the path. Remove that zayg from our hearts after you've already guided us. So it's very possible that once we've been guided, we can very much be misguided. So we have to constantly revisit this idea and notion of yaqeen and certainty, especially now, where, as I said, the Saudi regime, Wahhabis, Takfiris are pouring billions of dollars to dismantle the Shia ideology. And they're picking our youth and the speakers as their main target. They approach them on the streets of London, and they record them, and they debate with them about certain verses of the Quran. And of course, they put that on YouTube or on Facebook to show that the Shias are very weak in their faith. And the problem is that some of our Shia youth are buying into it. And it's important that we, constantly revisit the idea that it doesn't matter if there's 10 billion of them, we are on this path of haqq. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Now, this idea of ba'da idh hadaytana, that after we've already been misguided, after we've already been guided, it's important that we constantly revisit this idea. Now, one story I want to present to all of you in the Quran is that of Pharaoh. I talked about the mother of Musa yesterday, and I talked about Ashab al-Kahf yesterday. Verses from Surah Qasas and Surah Taha. Very, very important discussions. And one that I want all of you to please follow me. I have until 8:15. I'll go very fast. I have a lot to say as usual. So please just follow along with me. You know that during the time of Pharaoh, one thing that he did amongst several things is that he controlled the level of worship of his people. He told them not only how to live their life, but also what to worship and who to worship. He would talk to the chief and the chiefs of his kingdom. The Quran says very openly in Surah Qasas, the Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, قَالَ فِرْعَوْنَ يَا أَيُّهَا الْمَلَاءُ, O chiefs of my kingdom, مَا عَلِمْتُ لَكُمْ مِنْ إِلَهٍ غَيْرِي. He would say that I don't know of any other God that's good for you besides me. Meaning what? If you want to believe in any God, you are to believe in me. Nobody else makes sense to you but me. Meaning what? He's dictating now to them, you're to believe in me. And they would of course submit to him. Meaning he had them completely eating out of his own hand. He was completely controlling everything around his kingdom. He was the puppet master, they were the puppets. He pulled the strings and they would move in everything. Out of fear, out of ignorance, out of propaganda, whatever you want to call it, Pharaoh had complete control of his kingdom. Until this event in Surah Taha, the famous event of the serpent and the staff that all of you have heard. That now this show now has been arranged where the best of the best magicians are brought forward. Nabi Musa is brought forward. His staff becomes a serpent. That serpent devours the other snakes. All of you know the story very, very well. But the aftermath of that is extremely important. The aftermath of that is this. The same people that would sit there and accept Pharaoh to tell him, I am now your God, you are to worship me. Right after seeing this waqia and event of their snake being devoured by Musa's serpent, right away they say, قَالُوا آمَنَّا بِرَبِّ هَارُونَ وَمُوسَى. We now believe in the Lord of Harun and Musa. They fall in the sajda and right away proclaim in front of Pharaoh in his very kingdom that we denounce you as a God, we now move towards the Rabb of Harun and Musa. Verse 71 of Surah Taha now describes in very detail the aftermath of this event. Pharaoh is upset, furious. He says, how dare you now worship anybody else besides me without my permission? And then describes what he will do to them in terms of punishment. And graphic details. I will sever your hands and sever your feet. I'll crucify your bodies, he says. I will tie your crucified bodies to the trunk of trees for the whole world to see. Meaning what? There's constant threatening, and there's constant punishment, and there's constant intimidation happening. But the problem is that while before this waqia of the serpent and the staff, he could have easily swayed them towards them, now the problem is that they have seen yaqeen in their own eyes. They've seen it firsthand in their own eyes. And look at their response, 72 in Surah Taha. They say, almost laughing, the Quran says, فَقْضِ مَا أَنْتَ قَاضٍ. You decide whatever you want to decide. Do whatever you want to do. Now all of a sudden they have the himmah to stand up against Pharaoh. And they say, إِنَّهُمْ تَقْضِي هَذِهِ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. Whatever you decide to do with us is only limited to the life in this world. But what we saw with Harun and Musa's Rabb has to do with the hereafter as well. Meaning what? This collection of verses is telling us the moment that you have yaqeen and you see things either with your eyes of the body or your inside of the soul, nobody around you could ever take that yaqeen away from you. They can sit there and they can intimidate you. They can threaten you. They can place phobia on you. They can do all sorts of things. But those people stood there looking Pharaoh in the eye and say, فَقْضِ مَا أَنْتَ قَاضٍ. Do whatever you want to do. Whatever hukam you come down for us, do whatever you like. But you cannot allow us and force us to deny what we've seen with our own very eyes. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. That's the level of yaqeen that I want for myself and all of you. That when this situation that we have around the world, it's going to get very, very difficult as the Imam gets closer to coming. And as I mentioned a few nights ago, passingly I mentioned, that's not coincidence that the target seems like they are the followers of the Ahlul Bayt. Be it in Yemen or Bahrain or this genocide, let's say in Pakistan or Iraq or Syria or Afghanistan now, it just seems that wherever there's a gathering of Shias, there's a blast happening there. And there's a reason for that. They've recognized the fact that this is the one force that is a thorn in our side. We have an agenda, we want to establish that agenda, and this maktab of the Ahlul Bayt is a blockage for us. We can remove them one by one, we can establish our own level of government. The problem is that we won't go away. Because we've seen that yaqeen, we have that certainty. So now sometimes you wonder, why don't people back down? Why don't people lie about their faith? Why don't people hide their faith in the East where there's bloodshed happening? The problem is, again, we go back to these verses in Surah Taha, that once you've seen that yaqeen, you can't deny it. Your zamir and conscience screams at you. They could chop off your neck, but you can't leave the path that you're on. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And that comes from yaqeen, that comes from certainty, that comes from knowing your deen and knowing your madhab. That's why in the next few nights, I will tackle very hassas, sensitive topics like Ghadir, to make sure at least our youth understand that there is no other option to Ghadir but Ghadir itself. And we'll prove Ghadir, aqli, naqli, 1,000 proofs out there. And to my elders, it might be a repeat for all of you, but it's good to have our iman a little taza sometimes, especially in the month of Ramadan. To make sure that, at this time where we might be a little bit doubtful about our deen, to inject ourselves that level of certainty that we've had since we were children. But our youth need a little bit of that. To understand that I might be 10, but my 10 is better than their 100 and thousands. Right? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Again, we look at another story we have from the life of the Holy Prophet. And this time it's a Christian king now. I want you to follow me now very carefully. You know the first migration to Abyssinia, Ethiopia, was done by Jafri al-Tayyar, the brother of Amir al-Mu'mineen, where the Holy Prophet sends 80 plus people with him to go and seek asylum in Ethiopia. There's a God-fearing, God-loving king there named Najashi. Go and present your case to him and seek asylum. Because right now things are very, very difficult in Mecca. So Jafri al-Tayyar takes his qafila, arrives in Abyssinia. With him now also arrived the Quraysh. Because now they've got word that there's a caravan going now to Ethiopia. Their fear is that the deen might spread. So they, now to counter this caravan, end up also in the kingdom, in the palace of this king Najashi, a Christian king. And both of them present their cases. Okay? The Quraysh present their case that these are individuals who break laws inside of Mecca. We're a peaceful city, and they've come with their leader Muhammad, and they're causing ruckus inside Mecca. And then he asked Jafri al-Tayyar to present his case. And he begins to talk about the prophets of past, and talks about the book, the Quran. And then Najashi asked him, can you please recite for me a few passages of the Quran, your holy book? And the wisdom and the basira of Jafar is what? He chooses verses from Surah Maryam to present to the Christian king Najashi. Very wise of him. He begins to talk about Nabi Isa and Bibi Maryam in a very, very high regard. History says the king begins to what? Begins to cry. And history says his tears were a sign of yaqeen. His tears were a sign that, look, no matter how much, and the Quraysh came and they dropped at his feet all sorts of gifts and money and gold and treasure. Anything this dunya had to offer, they came bearing gifts to try to persuade the king from removing these Muslims back to Mecca. But the problem was that here you have the words of Allah, the kalam of Allah, that's hit the heart of Najashi to the point where he begins to shed tears. On one side, you have the dunya's riches. And he denies the riches of the dunya, and he accepts this word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he says now to Ja'far that you are free to live here in Africa for as long as you wish. I cannot deny what I've heard. Once we hear it, we can't deny it. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And this is why when you come to Karbala, it's a prime example for every aspect of our life, not just for gham and grief. Even today, it is a lesson for us, a university of us to tap into. That sometimes we wonder, and my youth ask us, and it's a good question, that why? Why would Imam Hussein do what he did? Because the other option wasn't an option on the table. It wasn't an option now where he saw Haqq to be the Holy Prophet with his own eyes now, and he saw dhulm and injustice and corruption and tyranny to be the embodiment of Yazid ibn Muawiyah. And the idea of me sitting at home, he would say to his ashab, and allowing him to claim to be the Khalifa of my grandfather's deen is not an option for me. Why did he go towards Kufa? Because he didn't have another option. It cannot be the fact that I know what's right and what's wrong, and I choose the other path. A lot of us are put in positions sometimes where we're asked to quiet our zamir down, quiet our conscience down. Silence our yaqeen, silence our certainty. And we have to, at that moment, be fair to ourselves. If you've been given the privilege of faith, with that comes a responsibility. And that responsibility is that those around you who are your enemies can sit there and tell you all they want about what they'll do to you. Sit there and call you names and terrorism and God knows what else. But that does not mean that you leave the path. The path is a path for you that has been laid out for you already. You've been given that gift from when you were a child, through the milk of your mother, or the tarbiyat of your father, or the ulama. Now for you to turn your back on that deen is very, very unfortunate. It's not the seerah of the imams, and it's not the seerah of the Holy Prophet. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So we'll examine things like Ghadir. We'll examine things like why the need for imamat. We'll examine things at the aqidah level for the next few nights, because the weekend now is here, the first weekend of the month of Ramadan, and we're expecting a bigger crowd. And I want to make sure that you take the proper message home. That you take this yaqeen and these levels of certainty and proofs, and you teach your children at home. This is what our aqidah is. I mentioned on the very first night, this aqidah begins at home. Drill it inside your children. Make them feel like they are the most privileged kids in the world, that you belong to this madhab. Never make them feel like whatever question you might have, there's no answer out there. I mentioned to you several times that on the flip side of certainty is doubt and shak. We don't quite understand the power of certainty until we feel the effects of shak and doubt. Then we know that this doubt can very easily lead us to kufr and disbelief. If it's left inside of our minds to fester, left inside of our minds unanswered. That's why I often tell my youth, you have a question, ask. Don't leave it unanswered, because that's not what the deen says. Always remember one thing. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad, please. It's a point I've made before, it's a point I want to make to all of you very, very clearly right now, especially to my youth who are listening. Any religion, any school of thought, with all due respect to all of them out there, that does not allow its followers to be a skeptic towards its content and its religion, know that there's a problem in that ideology. One more time. Any religion, any sect within a religion that does not promote the idea of having skepticism towards the deen that you believe in, know that there's a problem in the base of that deen or that sect of that deen. On the contrary, when you have a sect of Islam like the Ahlul Bayt and Shiism that not only answers the questions but promotes all of you and encourages you all to now doubt and be a skeptic and question and argue and do bahas and debate about the very tenets that you believe in, know that that system of belief has so much yaqeen in itself that no matter how many questions you might ask, ultimately the truth lies within that ideology. You look at our imams, look at our ulama, from Qadimi to today, the imams from our 5th and 6th imam, open door policy. All of you know this. From atheists that will come to ridicule the God that they believe in, to Jews that would come to debate them about Islam, to Sunnis that would come and debate them about Shiism. Whatever the case may be, they never turn anybody away. Nor did they ever tell any of their Shias to don't go and ask that individual. I'll give you one example, with all due respect. There's a high level of Christian converts we have in Canada, a point I've made before. And alhamdulillah, they continue to come into our deen. The problem is that we don't do enough to welcome them in. That's a different topic altogether. So many now go back to the religion because of the fact that there was no welcoming. There's no masjid, there's no building, nothing. If somebody walks into our buildings, we have this, this ajib look on our face. Different topic altogether. But the fact is that they've come to Islam for various reasons. And when I ask them why is it that they've come to Islam, they always point to one reality, of many, but one. They would say that we would present our questions to our local priest. And the biggest question we have is on the Trinity. You believe in one God, one God, one God, but to us it's a 1/3 of a God. Can you please explain this to us? And they would give them an answer that wasn't satisfactory for the individual. They would press some more. Eventually, the priest now would begin to question their level of faith and say, look, either you believe or you don't believe. Either you believe in the love of Jesus or you don't believe in the love of Jesus. These questions are coming from where? And the person would tell me inside the masjid that the fact that my priest could not answer the question on the basic tenets of the Christian faith made me believe there's a hole inside that faith today. Example number 2, very quickly. When I was growing up in Toronto, in my childhood, having Sunni friends wasn't a big deal back then. I had some very, very close Sunni friends. In fact, I would never see them as Sunni, and they would never see me as Shia. Now, unfortunately, that's not the case. So I had a group of friends, and most of them were my Shia brothers. Some were family friends. Others, of course, were my Sunni brothers. And once in a while, in the basement, in the garage, we're kind of hanging out, so you would be curious. Muharram comes about, and Ramadan comes about, and your iftar is 15 minutes after theirs, and if for some reason you have to pray at your Sunni friend's house, the questions come about. So one day I remember very vividly, we began to debate. We never talked about religion. But that one day we did. It's before my Qum days, obviously, when I was just a young guy. Went back and forth, So I remember asking one of my Sunni friends, go back to your imam on Friday or whenever your program is, and these are my questions for you to ask him. Let me know what he answers. He goes, sure, no problem. He had questions for my Maulana as well, and I came back with his answers. The next time I saw him, I said, what happened with the answers? He says that my imam told me to not be friends with you anymore. It's very standard. And the utmost respect for my Sunni brothers. But that's a gaping hole. It's a sign of a person who cannot defend his own ideology. And I say that with the utmost respect. I'm not painting everybody with the same picture. My point is that if there is not an encouragement to go out and be a skeptic of your deen, and I always encourage my youth wherever I go, whichever member I'm on, question what you believe in. We don't want blind followers. We want followers that believe on this path. Question, come and spend all night with me in a coffee shop. And believe me, I've had all-nighters about everything, like I said, from Turba to Azadari to 12th Imam to everything. But never for a moment believe that my deen doesn't have my answers. The door of the Ahlul Bayt is a door of answers. You look at the various ahadith. Imam Jafri Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam. He says that ilm, in a very famous hadith, he says that ilm is locked inside of a door. To open that door, you need a key. The key to that door are questions. Meaning what? This is a madhab. The Shia madhab is one that welcomes skeptics. In fact, it says to not believe things on the apparent. Question everything about your deen. Knowing full well, if you get to the right source, all the answers are there at the door. So part of the privilege of faith, my brothers and my sisters, is the idea that we can only see it as a privilege when we believe wholeheartedly into that faith. When we have yaqeen into that faith. We've seen the effects of the time of Pharaoh or the Christian king of Najashi. The moment they see or hear that yaqeen and that truth, they are bound by their zamir to submit to that ideology. I ask myself to also do the exact same thing, inshallah. We ask you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to help us achieve this yaqeen inside of our deen, inshallah. We ask you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to forgive our sins and those of our parents in the month of Allah, inshallah. We ask you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to accept our qaleel ibadat, inshallah. We ask you, Allah, to weaken the hands of the enemies of Islam, to strengthen the mustaza'afin all over the world. And finally, Allah, we ask you to make us isqabil of the zuhur of Imam Mahdi and to make us beside him on his mission.